Hello there, I'm Matt Lees, and can we keep politics out of gaming? No, it's not a statement, it's actually a question. Can we keep politics out of gaming? And it's a really easy answer. No. Gosh, that was quick. Alright, I should probably do something for the rest of you and explain maybe why. One thing I'm not going to do here though is talk about the actual value of purposefully including political messages within video games. It's a topic that's already been widely covered pretty damn well, and I don't think there's much value in focusing on explicit politics within media without first looking at the other side of the coin. Because what we're talking about here is explicit versus implicit. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's fine. Explicit means something which is just outward, which is visible, whereas implicit is something which is often unsaid and unseen. It's something which just bubbles beneath the surface rather than being shouted out. And they are arguably as powerful as each other. In terms of what we're talking about here, though, explicit is where a political idea or a thought is kind of purposefully put into a piece of work, whereas implicit is where you've naturally created a piece of work that's been influenced by wider political factors. And the interesting thing here is mostly when people complain about politics in games, they're only looking at one half of this puzzle. They're looking at the explicit factors. They don't like the idea that things are being purposefully put into games, and there's not really much focus on implicit factors and the impact of those. So let's just say I'm making a game about a hedgehog. He's called David the Hedgehog and he collects golden rings. I want to make a point about capitalism in my game, so David will be able to spend these rings on pointless bollocks, and he'll be openly encouraged to do so throughout the game. But that doesn't sound like fun, and aren't games just supposed to be about having fun? Alright, so we'll call him Sonic instead of David, and the rings will just be something you collect. They won't be used as currency at all, but you'll require some of them in order to survive. You know, if you don't have any rings at all, you'll run the risk of dying. But apart from that, it doesn't really matter if you've only got a little bit of money or if you've got loads. Although hang on, isn't that also a bit of a reflection on the relative futility of amassing large amounts of wealth? Well, probably not, no, but maybe. That's the thing, maybe. And if you're rolling your eyes at me injecting politics into something as inert and fun as Sonic the Hedgehog, then you'd better roll those eyes reverse clockwise pronto, because yes, Sonic the Hedgehog was actually designed to make a political point about environmentalism, which when the game came out was still a very sensitive topic that a lot of people just weren't comfortable talking about. But the point I'm trying to make here is that even if the creators of Sonic the Hedgehog hadn't intentionally decided to put a political message into the game, that might not have actually made a huge amount of difference, because when you're actually creating anything, it's a projection of the people that make it, and it's impossible to control the influences you have when you're dipping into the bucket of your mind. What are you going to get? Well, you don't really have 100% control over that. But of course, there is a massive difference between explicitly choosing to put a political angle into a game and just accepting the fact that your politics or what you think about the world will naturally be imprinted into the things you create. They're very different things, I get that. But the difference is really just in intention. At the end of the day, both of these things are going to have an impact on the product and an impact on the message that the product sends out to the world. Product, art, whatever you want to call it, it's going to have an effect. And if anything, implicit political values are more powerful and affecting. If you're playing a game like DMC and rolling your eyes at the overt jabs at a world dominated by basically Coca-Cola and Fox News, then the thing is you actually still retain the ability there to have a conscious opinion about the messages that your brain is consuming. When you're faced with explicit politics, you are able to see the ball coming towards your head and you can choose what you want to do with that. And what you need to understand is that that is a luxury that your brain is not often afforded. Because conscious reflection, being able to really examine things and examine the ideas that are being projected towards us, is a massive luxury. Most of the time we don't ever think about it. It just automatically gets digested and filed away in our brain without any kind of thought. And a lot of this really comes down to the nature of our diet. A huge amount of how we process media, video games, whatever, is based on implicit cultural politics. You know, in layman's terms, what you're used to. I think a really easy way to understand this is thinking about it in the same way you look at cultural diets. Not only you could fly to somewhere else in the world and eat a dish that you've never had and you might not like it, but also certain people have intolerances because of their cultural background, because some cultures have relied on wheat a lot more. Like the West, we love bread, beer, we love it. Other cultures not so much, and that causes intolerances somehow. Just because culturally it's different. They're not used to it. In the United Kingdom, for example, curries used to be really weird, and now they're just not. They're just things that people eat all the time. And culture does gradually shift over time, but no matter where you are at the point of your current culture, there still remains this weird ability for people to completely ignore the importance of everything they deem to be just normal, whilst fixating very strongly on anything that they think is new or strange. And the problem with this is that really what this idea of political influence comes down to, this idea of like, oh, this is political, is not really political. It's just something which deviates from what we deem in our heads to be normal. But what is normality? All right, well, this is normality. This is a straight line. It's non-political, nothing weird about it. This is normality. But this curvy line here, well, sometimes it's normal, but it seems to have some sort of weird agenda. Why can't it just be a normal straight line? I mean, this seems like an entirely reasonable way to look at reality, up until the point that you realise that someone else's baseline for normality is actually up here, at the top of the curve. That's what normal means to them. And so from their perspective, they're like, why are they going down there? What's all that stuff down there about? What's all that weird stuff? Weirdos. See, it doesn't really work. Normality is an illusion, but norms are very much real. There's no one complete objective truth to reality of what it is. But at the same time, there are very much patterns which we can identify, which can help us understand the way that most people tend to perceive it. The distinction between these two things is really important, but it's often that these things get crudely lumped together to mean the same thing. It's common, therefore, for people to naturally assume that the most popular sentiments are probably the ones that are right, which creates this culturally shared baseline for what normality is. And the thing you got to understand is this is cyclical. Media reflects the norms of popular culture, which shapes the next generation of creators who will then go on to reflect their experiences of popular culture through the media that they create. Avoiding explicit politics is easy. Avoiding implicit politics is impossible. We are the creation of the world around us, and politics have entirely defined the people that we are. Now, there are two different angles that you can look at here, and they both boil back to the same core issue. You can either look at games as works of art, which reflect purely the desires and thoughts of the people that create them, or you can look at games as products, and you can look at games as creations which come to be because of the wider needs and wants of the market. Interestingly, those who get most angry about political elements infringing upon games do so with a heavy consumer angle. This idea of being, we are the majority consumers of games and we demand that these products are made to properly suit us. I think this is a really fascinating sentiment that really just reflects the true power of capitalism. Not the power that these chaps would presume to wield, one of consumer rights and voting with your wallet and asserting the value of the customer, but a power which has seen capitalism instill the masses with a real sense of individual importance. Ironically, the consumer revolution tends to fight most frequently for just one thing: preventing wider cultural values from shifting away from the current state. Because look at the current state of games and tell me that they aren't inherently political. Is it just a coincidence that the most popular games made and sold in America all focus on violence and guns? Could it not be maybe related to America's ongoing fascination and apologist nature towards violence and guns? And what about Germany and Farming Simulator? Could the huge popularity of non-violent games in German culture be directly related to the fact that as a nation they still have to deal with the genuine horrors caused by previous generations? Could that be a factor? Or is it just another wacky coincidence? How is it that people can attack a game that features lesbians as being needlessly and overtly political, while failing to see any kind of political influence on games in which American soldiers fly around the world willy-nilly shooting people in the face? The fact that we perceive that as being normal is inherently incredibly fucking weird. Then again, games like Call of Duty can be weird without even specifically looking at violence. 2014's Advanced Warfare explored some deeply political themes. It raised questions about the privatization of the military and the risks of automated warfare. It even went as far as to explicitly question the value of America's track record of questionable warmongering, with a villain that aimed to seize control from the states as a method of effectively enforcing worldwide peace. And when you look at Call of Duty's primary audience, these are incredibly sensitive themes to explore. which is perhaps why the game didn't actually do that. Shades of grey persist right through the game's story until the final act, in which the antagonist is revealed to be an inhuman monster, neatly negating any challenging questions about the merits of what the villain was aiming to achieve. In cases like this, there's nothing more political than a piece of work that's adamant that it doesn't have anything political to say, and yet this is a trap that heavily funded games frequently fall into. The real question with stuff like Advanced Warfare is which elements are explicit and which elements aren't, and who are the people who end up deciding what political message the finished game projects. As with many modern shooters, Advanced Warfare straddles two conflicting trains of thought. Gosh, isn't all war awful versus war is okay if America wins. It's weird, blatant, and doesn't make sense, but the lack of a clear political message ends up being the political message that the game projects. It's a game that does batshit backflips just to be in a position where it definitely isn't saying anything at all, really. And I mean, that's par for the course with this nature of expensive mass market game development, but that in itself is inherently very bloody political. Because here's the kicker, if you want to talk about games being political, you want to talk about politics in games, then the first thing you need to do is take a big step back and look at what you deem to be normal. Look at what you think is just standard. Why is it normal? How did it become normal in your head? Is it actually normal? Is it something that maybe you should think about again because maybe it's really weird? Now, a lot of people dismiss any form of analysis like this, and when you start talking like this, they just go, oh, can't games just be fun? Why do we have to, oh, what's the point? The thing you've got to understand is each and every mechanic in every game you play is a reflection of the environment in which they were created. They're a reflection of the world. I mean, for example, let's look at the classic video game trope of lives. Why do you have a certain number of lives? Does that have any cultural significance? And also, why did it take so long for video games to embrace the idea that games didn't need to include the risk of death as a core mechanic in the game? Well, there's an actual answer to this, and the answer is boring. It's because games started out mostly as arcade machines, and buying lives was the most efficient way of getting people to keep putting money in to the machines. And once you know that, though, how do you feel about the importance of lives as a game mechanic? Something which was a beloved staple, something which was deemed to be a really important part of games for so many years. And it really only ever came about because of a faintly crass commercial interests. And the same thing is true of modern games. Marketing has largely defined our hobby, and marketing just isn't effective if you target mixed groups. The result is a hobby that's largely defined by a group of men in suits. That's the only reason that most of the people who play games, well, in the past, were teenage men, and it's not a surprise that most of the products are marketed towards teenage men. That's just a reflection of how marketing best works. It's not a case of what makes the best games, it's just a case of what sells the best. People currently moaning about politics being put into games might lack the perspective to zoom out a little bit and realise that games actually represent a really interesting and blatant snapshot of where we currently are as a world, as a culture. I mean, let's just think about this for a second. Let's pretend that we're an alien looking at the planet and looking at video games. We look at these games and go, oh, what is this about? What is this? Oh, games are a form of media that appear to be largely dictated by the needs of capitalism, with a general focus on achieving superiority through violence. I mean, like, that's us. That's humans. If that isn't a political reflection of what we are, then I don't know what is. An idea explored perfectly by a book called The Player of Games, which was an incredible book written by the late Iain M. Banks. It talks about the idea of how the games we create and how we play them are in a way a pure reflection of the society that actually created that game. And if you understand the society that created the game, you can understand how to be good at that game, or at least understand how they're made and what they are. And I think that's something that really rings true. Games are already an implicitly political reflection of our culture, which means that any demands to keep politics out of games pretty much boils down to the regressive practice of rallying against anything that's different or new. Demanding that nothing changes at all is inherently hugely political in itself. You know, the waves of change just happen over time, and anyone who doesn't bob along with that eventually finds themselves in the awkward position of being left behind and finding that what used to be thought of as normal now makes them strange. You know, for example, racism. But really, the problem we're dealing with when it comes to people talking about politics and games is people who think that they're kind of above the waves. People who think that while the masses might be moved around by culture and media, they're kind of above it somehow, untainted, with an overview of things that's just sort of a bit more complex or better. And basically it's impossible to really talk about the idea of politics in games without also looking at this idea of objectivity, this idea that some people feel that they have complete control over their mind consciously, which scientifically speaking is nothing short of arrogance. On the internet, we often find ourselves dealing with a generation of self-defined intellectuals who aim to effectively analyse reality using very little other than their own internal wit. And this trend seems to come down to the common misconception that being aware of basic psychological processes makes you somehow immune to external influence, providing a unique advantage that most people lack. What these people often don't tend to notice is that their wholly original one-man mission against the inclusion of unwanted politics in media is effectively a perfect overlap with the pre-existing widespread status quo. But then again, why have all of these characters sprouted so abundantly, specifically within the world of games? Well, perhaps that's partly the result of a medium that so openly worshipped the power of the protagonist. You have a unique understanding of the world. You are more important than anybody else, and the world around you will eventually bend itself to shape your own will. But the people who complain the most about politics in today's media are arguably often the same people the most blatantly shaped by the political influences of the media that came before them. I'd argue that white dudes who complain about politics in games whilst flexing their power as important consumers are just another crass creation of the exact same school of marketing that led to the creation of Gears of War. The idea that these people hold that they're somehow above all of this stuff is an integral part of the illusion. But thankfully, the arrogance that naturally comes with this makes ignorance relatively easy. Because as with anything else made by humans, games are political creations and will always be political creations. And any argument otherwise is either ignorant or willfully dishonest and can effectively be simplified as an attempt to try and stop change. And there's nothing new or unique about people trying to stop change, but in the long term, you can't expect the world to be kind to you about it. The universe can't always be just about you, and you can either just smile and shrug and simply accept that, or you can just refuse and continue to spend the rest of your life miserable and angry and determined to somehow bend it to your will. Because that's really where the problem lies here. It's nested within this impossible ideal of objectivity and objective thinking. When you believe that every element of culture that might have an impact on you is something that you can consciously identify, you're effectively enforcing your own ignorance, ironically for the sake of wanting to feel intelligent. Because we can't ever really know the way that culture will implicitly affect us in the future, but we can get a measure of how it's affected us already by examining our own views about politics and media. Because until you accept and understand the fact that your perspective of reality has been mostly shaped by implicit factors that you aren't even conscious of, you'll be forever stuck on autopilot, making decisions based on powerful unconscious influences that you refuse to admit really exist. Or you can accept that objectivity is an impossible dream, accept that implicitly politics are a part of everything, and just sort of like work to identify and slowly change the things about reality that you've deemed to be normal that maybe consciously, if you think about it, aren't that cool. Because to be blunt, complaining about politics and games, it just makes you look like an idiot. Same is true with objectivity. It's an impossible dream. It's a wonderful one, but it's an impossible dream. And when you go around talking about this stuff, you just make yourself look like you don't understand the world. Because nobody sits above the waves. We're all bobbing about in culture, and the best that you can do is try and understand over time the way that currents tend to move you around in ways that you maybe don't like, and just sort of try and gently paddle around it a little bit. Be like, oh no, I don't want that to be happening, so I'm going to try and paddle around in a way that you think will keep you stable, a way that you think might keep you where you want to be in terms of how you view the world. But the truth of the matter is you'll never really know. And there will always be unseen cultural currents affecting you in ways that you won't recognise, perhaps until later, perhaps never. The thing is, the people who think that they're above all of that, the people who think that they're not even in the water, they haven't even got a paddle, and they're not on the surface of the water anymore. Anyway, this has been a long video, but thank you very much for watching, and yeah, bye! If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like more people to naturally stumble across it on the internet, then clicking the like and subscribe button magically makes that happen. Also, if you really like my stuff, then you might consider funding my work on Patreon, because otherwise it wouldn't happen. Thanks very much. Bye!